Hola, 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 hola. Muy buenos días a todas.
Morning,
Muy buenos
everyone.
días.
Good morning. Today we'll have the fifth class of this third international seminar on reparations for slavery and colonization. I think this has been a very fruitful week, and we'll take with us many different ideas that will hopefully transform into proposals and struggle tools in order to achieve this better world we all dream of. Today I would like to share some news with you. The Federal Court of Manhattan in the United States, it has taken a painting of the painter Egon Schiele from Austro-German Expressionism, and this painting is currently in a gallery, but it's been reclaimed by the family of Fritz Gornbaum. It is an art collector that used to work at cabarets. He was a Jew, by the way. He was detained and he died in the concentration camp of Dachau. That painting is currently in a gallery, but his family was reclaiming that painting, and the court says the following: there's a reasonable cause to believe that this painting constitutes robbed property. So there's, of course, a legal dilemma that claim to be the owners of this painting that was robbed by the Nazis, and the gallery that also claims they legally bought the painting. I wanted to mention this because I don't know if you have seen something similar, if there's a demand, but half of the artifacts in the British Museum are robbed, or all the masks in the Gold Coast from Africa in France are also robbed. It doesn't seem to be a legal case there. They don't discuss how legal it is to have those artworks there, those artifacts, tools, and many of them have a very important spiritual value that are currently in European and North American museums. There's no discussion on the painting from Egon, if it will be better to have it there in the gallery or in the house of the owner, but we do discuss that with the artworks in the European museums, the Egyptian artworks that are in the British Museum, and one of the reasons they don't send them back is because they claim it is in a better situation if they keep them in Britain instead of sending them back to Egypt. This is, of course, a feeling of superiority from the British Museum. They probably know what true art is, and the rest of us do not know how to take care of art. And that must also be part of reparations, giving back and recognizing the artifacts that have been robbed. No one sold those objects, no one borrowed those objects. In the case of the British, especially, they were used to leaving everything in writing. For example, they legally bought the island of Manhattan, but we would have to check who signed that sale. Maybe they didn't even know how to sign. Maybe they didn't understand the language, but they feel well with themselves just because they claim they bought the island. So reparations is constantly present, and with the case of this painting, we can see the double standard of that legal framework when we compare it in Europe and North America, and we will continue here struggling. Welcome everyone, and now we will give the floor to Aisamar Ochoa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the closure of this week. Such a fruitful week we've had with Sandew. We were reviewing how the Marxist theory contains many elements of scientific thought, Western scientific world, and that in some way tends to make other cultural currents inferior. We also saw how, despite that, in the revolution of Russia, China, and Iran, Marxists were able to adapt to these other cultural currents, and they were able to base that in their own philosophy, their own history, going from Marxism. Today we will continue deepening with Sandew, with the whole review we have done the whole week, and now we will see the perspectives and the future perspectives in order to have a social transformation and reparations. For decolonizing the mind and thoughts. Please again turn off your phones. We will have live streaming on YouTube. Remember, the name of the channel is at Reparaciones Colonización, and without any further ado, we will start with Sandew, and I will now give the floor to him.
Today I'm going to talk about imagining a new future. But before I do that, I will deal with some other topics that are not related to it. First, I'll comment on Guillermo, because when he was talking, I was thinking about the case in mathematics of the so-called Rhine papyrus. What is it? A Scottish guy, Alexander Henry Rhine, purchased this papyrus rolls in Egypt, in Luxor, and they were stolen when they excavated a temple of the pharaoh. So Rhine bought it, and when somebody could decipher it, the name of the author was discovered. His name was Ames. So normally, if you write a book, you publish the book, then you call it after the author. I publish a book. This is a book by Sandew Hira. In the colonized version, they publish the paper and they name it after the guy who stole it, not after the guy who wrote it. This is how colonization of the mind works. You know, these are the Rhine papers. Every mathematic book talks about the Rhine papers, the guy who bought it from stolen sources, rather than the guy who wrote it, which name is known, Ames, you know. Okay, I want to go into another thing. I think it's in 2015 in Amsterdam, we had organized Decolonizing the Mind summer school. I was lecturing there, and there were many people from South Africa there. And during those discussions, I learned about Ubuntu as a philosophy. I read about Ubuntu, but reading is not the same as getting into your body, you see? So those people who are really into Ubuntu philosophy, these African people, if they tell you, you see things that you don't see in reading. And one of the things I learned from a sister, Sodwa Radebe, she says, in teaching you, I'm learning. So they have this idea that a teacher is not only somebody who shares knowledge, it's somebody who in the process of sharing knowledge gains knowledge. And I'll give you a nice example of it today, this morning. So I was talking the whole week about the need to move from reparations to reconstruction. So we can reconstruct science. I was talking to Guillermo, and we are talking about, we are reconstructing biology. You need to know, you need to have a new text on biology. And how does it mean? What does it mean to say you're reconstructing biology? So he says, Dale, I want you to meet Pedro, who is a member of this group of useless discussions. And, this group discusses things about all kinds of topics, and one was on biology. And there I learned some interesting things. We were discussing about how the Europeans look at the relationship between nature and human beings. And in biology, the name of Darwin, is a major thing. Darwin is the founder of biology. So everything that Darwin says, I showed him that he was also a racist, but is Darwin collected the empirical evidence and came up with the evolution theory. The evolution theory is based on a concept that is natural selection, survival of the fittest. And it means that animals and the species are individuals who act on the basis of the instinct that you should survive. And when we discuss it, we're discussing how do you look at it from a decolonial way? And I said, look, the European Enlightenment had the concept, the liberalism of individuals. So they look at nature through the lens of the individual. They look at animals and they see animals as individuals. Oh, this is the leopard, this is the lion. If you could give them a name, maybe the rainbow, the Max and Deo and whatever you have. It's individuals. And then Guillermo says, but if you look at nature, you will see that animals also live in social groups. So, social groups, the concept of community is also in nature of animals. Animals, if they have a community, what is the driving force in maintaining the community? If you take liberalism as a concept, then the community will fall apart. Everybody looks after his own thing. So, empirical evidence tells us that is not the case. They don't act as individuals, they work together in hunting, in protecting the community. So, if there are social groups, then the next question is, do they have knowledge? Now, in Eurocentrism, knowledge is something only gained by humans. Why? Because the humans have in the European Enlightenment discussed, theorized knowledge, and they came to the conclusion that knowledge is the result of observation and reasoning. That is what Eurocentric science tells us. And in DTM, Decolonizing the Mind, I argue there are more sources of knowledge. For example, there is social interaction. Social interaction. I gave the example of Descartes. If Descartes was the only person on earth, he would never know if he was dreaming or not. But if there are people around Descartes, they could wake him up and say, hey, Descartes, René, wake up. And that knowledge, that insight comes from social interaction. So now the question is, do animals produce knowledge? So what is knowledge? Knowledge is, for example, the idea, the insight that if we go on hunting, why do we take this strategy and not that strategy? They could run after, but you will see animals sometimes they say, you go left, I go right, and we enclose the animal, and then we do it. This requires communication. So the next step is, if animals have communication, not through our language, because they don't speak English or Spanish, they have their own language. And they communicate through their own language. Is in the process of communicating, are they transferring knowledge? Are they saying, if you go right, it is because you mislead the prey. You go right and they go there, but I'm there. How do they do that? If they have not an idea of misleading as a concept. And then the next question comes, if knowledge is gained by observation and reasoning only, then knowledge is transferred, in a document, in a speech, whatever you have. If knowledge is social, then it is transferred through social interaction. So the question is, can a community of whales, for example, can they transfer knowledge to the next generation? And then Guillermo tells me, and Pedro, if you look at empirical evidence of the animal world, you will see it. You will see that they transfer knowledge. You see? I find it so fascinating, this 10 minutes, 5 minutes conversation that we have, that helps us think about the reconstruction of knowledge in a discipline which you don't expect. Because when we talk about decolonizing, we talk about philosophy and sociology, but you don't think about biology of how do you do the deconstruction. And another discussion that we had was the relationship between humans and nature in Eurocentrism is that humans are not part of nature. Nature is separate from humans. But not only that, humans are superior to nature. Humans can say, I cut the trees and I drain the water in the river and I put a dam. Humans can do that. But now there are other philosophies who have a different view of the relationship between humans and nature. For example, in Christianity, Christian theology, which is part of Europe, and in Islam, they argue that God had given nature to human being not as a possession, but with the duty to take care of it. So that's a concept. Another concept is Pachamama, Mother Earth. In Bolivia, there they argue that the tree and the mountain and the river have a spirit, have thoughts, have ideas. And they construct it in such a way that they say we need to respect Pachamama, our Mother Earth. And that respect we put together in a declaration of rights for Mother Earth. Just like you have a declaration of rights of Declaration of Human Rights. And in that declaration, they say what it means to respect nature, how you deal with the exploitation of nature, with the forests, and how you respect the integrity of nature. Now, when a Eurocentrist hears this, nature has a spirit, etc., because they think in terms of observation, reasoning, and the distance between humans and nature, in their idea, this is nonsense. You're talking nonsense when you talk the mountain has a voice. But they themselves see that nature is not a loose collection of objects. Nature interacts with each other. The objects interact, the wood and the river and the mountain, they interact. But they have another term for it, they call it ecosystem. So they see the interaction, and their terminology, their concept is ecosystem. But that concept doesn't lead automatically to a declaration of the respect of the ecosystem. Because the idea of respect between humans and nature is not built into ecosystem. Ecosystem is the humans are here, and that's the ecosystem, and the ecosystem functions. And now you see our human civilization has been led to a situation now where there's an ecological disaster going on. Because of capitalism, but also because of the ideas of how you look at human and nature. So, in the Pachamama concept, you ask permission to the nature to do before you start doing something. But for the Eurocentrists, asking permission to a tree to, you don't do that. But because of that philosophy of asking permission, the respect for nature is ingrained in you. You don't do just whatever you like with nature. So what I'm saying here is, when we talk about another future, how will another future look like? It starts with reconstructing the sciences. We build another future by building another base of knowledge. We do that obviously first by criticizing Eurocentric knowledge, but then you have to build new concepts, alternative concepts, and reconstruct the science. And from the science comes the policy. If this is your view of animals, that is not natural selection, but that it is, there are other views of it, of social interaction, then your policy of how you deal with ecology is different. You have a different economic policy on ecology. So if you have a different economic theory, if you say an economy, if you criticize liberal economic theory that says the best way to organize an economy is through the market and private ownership of means and production with supply and demand, if that is what your theory says, and we look at the outcome of it, we see a lot of horrible things. We see economic crisis, we see exploitation. So if now we have another theory, another economic theory, and they can be different. For example, Islamic economic theory has the economic theory of banking. They say money cannot generate money. So you can't ask interest as a bank. Interest is forbidden. It's halal. But if interest is halal, how do you organize a financial system then? And they say oh, the banks are not giving you money and interest, they are co-investors in your project. You buy a home, they invest in it, and you pay back the investment. That's different concepts, you know. The Chinese came from Marxism, and they say, you know, market exists in every system, and it works within that system. Why can't it work in a socialist system under the leadership of the party even? So you see, there are many ways to reconstruct knowledge with many practical consequences. And my view is that what we need is the restructuring of our centers that produce knowledge, which are universities. Basically, the universities should be the structures, should be the institutions that produce these new textbooks. But many universities are so Eurocentric that they can't even imagine that that is a challenge that needs to be taken up. They just teach whatever they teach for centuries, you know, the same things that they have learned and within the same systems. So I think that that will be a major challenge for the future. And then I'm going to the slides. Yes. Before I go into the future, how to imagine a new future, and I'll go step by step on it. Yesterday there were some questions, and one brother put a question about the question of attitude. What does decolonizing the mind mean for skills and attitude? And I think, I don't deal with it extensively, but I think that it's one of the most important things, because if decolonizing the mind through knowledge creates mental slavery, then it has impact on two things: attitude and skills, technical and social skills. The impact on attitude of mental slavery is self-hate, passivity, lack of self-confidence. So I give the example of let's say a black audience is here, colonized in their mind. And you have a black professor and a white professor talking to them about the moon. And then the black professor says, you know, the moon is not round, it's a square. You know what the black audience will say? Look, this stupid professor, this stupid black professor, how can you say that the moon is square? And then comes the white man. And the white man says, the moon is square. You know what the colonized black audience thinks? What did he see that I didn't see? There must something be wrong with me, because, you know, this is the man. The moon is square. I don't see that it's square, but something is wrong. I don't understand it. Can you explain it to me? For the black professor, say, you're stupid. This is how colonization of the mind works in your mind, you see? Now, one of the practical things we can do today, tomorrow, look in your environment, in your community, and study how does it work, mental slavery, with my neighbor, with my professor, with my student, you know? And then think, how do I reverse it? Obviously, if mental slavery makes you less confident, you should have programs to increase self-confidence, be proactive, be assertive. That is what decolonizing the mind comes to. And your skills, your technical and social skills, can be impacted by mental slavery. For example, the fact that you are uncritical when it comes to white people and very critical when it comes to black people and when you're black is a skill. It's not only an attitude, it's also a skill. You are trained to do that. You know, you're trained to say, oh, black people talk nonsense and white people talk always fantastic things. See? So that part of DTM is something that we need to develop with psychologists, pedagogists, activists, artists who can come up with ideas of how to do that. So I don't know whether there were questions via Zoom which I didn't answer.
Ok, gracias por recordarme que habían preguntas de ayer porque lo
There
había.
were questions of yesterday. I had forgotten to say that, ask about that, of yesterday's questions. Well, questions pending yesterday. One of them comes from Bernarda Marieta Valera, and she comments, it doesn't seem more difficult to obtain rates of growth that are important growth rates as a higher level of development is achieved. Isn't it true that there are new problems, as for example, the struggle against pollution? And then we have, that's a comment. And then that's it. That's the sole one, a question, comment that was pending from yesterday, sir.
In the Eurocentrism, economic theory is formulated in such a way that it colonizes your mind. I'll give you an example. I had a conversation yesterday evening with our friends from Curaçao. And they were saying, Curaçao is a colony of Holland, but so with limited independence. They have to look after their own budget. And now for the first time, the Dutch, every year, there is a deficit in the budget. And then every year, the Dutch have to come up with some money for the deficit. And now for the first time, there's a minister who succeeded in turning the deficit into a surplus. Everybody's delighted. Fantastic. Even Shan, you know. Oh. And you know what? The minister is gay. And the people don't like gay in Curaçao, but they like the minister. What an irony. Now my point is this. Why are we so enthusiastic about the deficit? Why is it important? And why is not important the wages? Why don't we talk about what did he do to increase the living standards of the people? What did he do for the unemployment? How many people got a job? Why do we talk about the deficit as a fantastic thing in Curaçao, but not in the United States? Why is there no big discussion on the trillions of deficit of the budget of the United States or in Japan or in Europe? Here you see how economic theory is an instrument in colonizing the mind by shifting the discussion to do as if something is fantastically, greatly important, which is fund the budget. Yes, we should do that, and we should, yeah. But why is that the most important thing and not the unemployment and the wages of people and a decent standard of living? And I think that is what we need to change. Whenever there's a discussion on the deficit of the budget, we should link that discussion on what about the unemployment and the wages, you see? So that is my response to the comment of the viewer. Okay, then I'll start now with imagining a new future. How do the Eurocentric methods of imagining the future works? The scientific people are saying this. They have a discipline called future studies. Future studies is studying not the future. They call it future studying, but they are studying the past. And then they extrapolate it to the future. That is not future studies. That is past studies. With extrapolation, then that's what you should. So, what do? They collect the historical data. For example, how big will the population be in 2050? How can you know that? You can know that only when you have the data of birth, death, every year. This is the number now, and then you use mathematics, not imagination. You do mathematics and say, okay, the mathematics tells us in 2050 that will be the population. But because it works, yes, if you are in 2023, and I predicted in 2023, in 2000 that this will be, you can check it, you can validate it. And when it's validated, you say, fantastic, we have a good population model. You don't think about what causes death and birth. You know, suppose there's a nuclear war. Suddenly, the population production wouldn't work. Because you know, then you have a total destruction. So, I'll give you an example, next slide, of a group. They call themselves the Club of Rome, but I would think we should call them the Club of Useless Discussions. Because they hired scientists. It was founded in 1968. And they produced a report in 1972. It was called The Limits of Growth. And they took all these data, and they took also the data of China. And then they made the graphs, and then they said, the report projected that 8 years after 1972, in 2000, the per capita income of China would reach $100. But in reality, it was $950. So now this is a big difference. If they use mathematics, obviously they were wrong about China. And that's why we call it the group of useless discussions. They were wrong. Because there was imagination in Deng Xiaoping. Says, no, we are not going to do what we do yesterday. We're going to imagine a new thing. And then the policy came from imagination, not from the models, not from the mathematical model, came from imagination. So here you see the difference between Eurocentric knowledge and DTM, decolonizing the mind. We acknowledge imagination as a source of knowledge. You see? So what are we going to do? We are going to study how does imagination work. Next. I'll give you a few examples. In 1959, 6 years before the abolition of slavery, 1 year before the start of the Civil War, there was a rebellion against slavery led by white people, an armed rebellion. The guy who led it was John Brown. He was a white abolitionist and organized a group of 22 men, among them 5 Africans, that wanted to bring down slavery through an armed rebellion. They attacked an arsenal with arms and ammunition in Virginia. And then they called upon the enslaved Africans to rise up in a general rebellion. There was no response. The US Army captured them. Some were immediately killed. All but one of Brown's sons was executed after a trial. Now this is 1959, right? Imagine a young enslaved African looking at this whole process. What would go through the mind of that person? Probably he will think, look, slavery will exist forever. Nothing in his mind or her mind would say, next year, in 6 years, slavery will be abolished. So, the only way to think that once slavery will be abolished, if you have the imagination that one day injustice will end. If you don't have that imagination, you can't think that there will come a time where slavery will be ended. But look what happened with John Brown. So imagination tells you one day injustice will end. You could take that as one day it will end. In the past we have a lot of examples, slavery, to see, oh, that's how it works. Now, next, let me give you another one, Haiti, 1791. Toussaint Louverture says, freedom is a right given by nature. So if freedom is a right given by nature, and you are living in a system of unfree, nature gives you the right, yet you are unfree, you are enslaved. How do we envision that one day this will end? How do we do that? And Toussaint Louverture basically says, if we say freedom is a right given by nature, then it is man that has taken away that right. So what you need to do, you need to fight man. You don't fight nature. Nature has given you, you fight man. So you define, you put forward the idea that freedom given by nature, taken by man, should be retaken by the enslaved people. You put your target very clear. We want freedom. We want freedom in a country that is 90% black. Haiti, 90% black. If once your imagination says, I have a goal, And that goal is realistic. Well, everybody thinks it's not realistic. You say it's realistic, but it's not, because it's not nature. It's humans that do it. Then the second thing is that you imagine, how does this system that takes away your freedom, how does it work? And you say, oh, it works because you have economic power, military institutions, the colonization of mind, all these things are there. That's why we understand how the system works. And then comes the French Revolution, and he observes, he says, oh, they are weak now. The French Revolution has broken their political might. There's disunity. They are divided. The old order was smashed. It's in competition with other imperial power. France and Spain and England, they fight each other. Well, here it is. This is the moment. The imagination is there. This is the moment to regain it. If you would ask me in 70-60, I don't see this division. I say this is not the moment yet. You know it will end, but you know this is not the moment. And when he saw this is the moment, then the next step was that he said, oh, how do I gain it now they are weak? And then he comes up, we need an armed rebellion with a structure. So you build an army. It's not that people just do something. You need an army. Mind you, in Haiti, there have been other revolutions before. Macandal is a name in Haiti who tried to set up a scheme to poison. It was they detected it and it failed. It was not an army. It was just an act one time. But Toussaint said, in order to build an army, I need first, obviously, the vision, the strategy. So an army is built by instilling in people the idea that you must take your freedom. The next thing is you set up a structure. You take weapons. You have officers. You have training. You have plan of attack. And you build all these things, and then you do the first armed attack. And it works, here it fails. And if you do that, you see that the French and the Spaniards and the English have divisions, and they are there. So you might have a temporary coalition with the Spains against the Spaniards, against the French. And by doing this, he succeeded in gaining independence. Now, there were a lot of other problems coming there. In fact, Toussaint's mind, to a certain extent, was also colonized, but he believed that the French were people of integrity and respect. So when they lured Toussaint, to a meeting, and then they captured him and brought him to France, where he died in a jail, this was a result of not understanding that when the French invite you to dinner, you should be careful. So what you see, that imagination is not just dreaming. It's a dream based on analysis, it is possible to build another society. It is possible. And that is the essence of the message of decolonizing the mind. It is possible to have a new world civilization. But when I say a new world civilization, oh man, it's so big and so grand, and how can we do that, and where do we start? Yes, we start with dreaming about how it will work. And then we go step by step. Oh, we need to go at knowledge as a basis. We need to decolonize the discipline. We need to build new policies. And obviously, we connect these liberation movements in the world for a new, and then we could have thousands of things that we can do. So the next slide, let's go to how people have imagined a new world. And I go to the Bible. You know, the Bible didn't originate in Amsterdam, in Palestine. It's not part of the global south. People think that the origin of Christianity is in Western Europe, but that's not the case. The power was eventually constituted in Western Europe. But in the Christian view of a better world, it's a world that is in the heaven. It's not here. The Bible said, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. So the new world is a world without sorrow. You don't cry. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For the former things are passed away. So this is a world of peace and happiness. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and thus shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. There is a world where there could be an end of all pain and sorrow. They dream about it. It's not the world here, but after our death. But if it's after our death, can it be also before? The Quran says, therein you shall have all that your inner self desires, and therein you shall have all for which you ask. An entertainment from Allah, the oft-forgiven, the most merciful. Eat and drink at ease for that which you have sent forth, good deeds in days past. Rivers of water incorruptible, rivers of milk of which the taste never changes. And we shall remove from their breasts any hatred or sense of injury. They will not hear therein ill speech or commission of sins, only the saying, peace, peace. People all across the world dream of a better life. So if they dream about a better life, is it just normal that we put in action that which enables this dream, rather than accept the saying, this is how the world is and this is how it will be forever? In Hinduism, next, one of the variants of Hinduism is also a concept of heaven. In Indra Loka is a tree that never withers and bears any fruit one wishes for. A never-aging cow that provides all that one wants. A gem that fulfills every wish. A pot that is always full of grain and gold. A nectar that keeps the devas healthy, useful, and immortal. A goddess who ensures an endless flow of wine, and buxom damsels well versed in the 64 arts to sing, dance, and provide eternal entertainment. The devas who live in Indra Loka are forever in a state of pleasure, prosperity, and power. The city is the very embodiment of affluence and abundance. It is the Hindu paradise. Now this world exists. It exists today in the palaces in Saudi Arabia, in the mansions of the billionaires in Europe and North America. They have the honey and the gems. They have the entertainment. The world exists. Not for the overwhelming majority. It's not after death, but the world exists. And now comes Confucius from China, who talks about how do we get there? How do we get to this ideal world? And he says, you get there through the way you conduct yourself. He says, base yourself on virtue. Rely on humaneness. Relax with the art. Attack the evils in yourselves, not the evils in others. This is how to remedy badness. If you can't correct yourself, how can you hope to correct others? Be hard on yourself. Go lightly when you blame others. That way you stay clear of resentment. Don't worry about whether other people understand you. Worry about whether you understand other people. What do you want others to do to you? Do not do to others. So he says, a better society is something we can create now. It's how we conduct ourselves. Next. Now comes the European Enlightenment. And the European Enlightenment also has a concept. And the concept is articulated already in 1830 by George Hegel, who says Europe has reached the final stage of human history, the last stage in history. And that last stage is how our world, our time is. And we have articulated the idea of freedom, individual freedom. And this is how it will be. And 250 years later, comes Francis Fukuyama, an American-Japanese conservative, and repeats Hegel. Imagine 250 years later, a lot of things have changed. Hegel thought that is how the world will be. And now comes Fukuyama and says, the world we live in, that is how the world will be for the coming 1,000 years. He says, what we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. This is not to say that there will no longer be events to fill the pages of Foreign Affairs, that is an American journal, yearly summaries of international relations, for the victory of liberalism has occurred primarily in the realm of ideas or consciousness and is as yet incomplete in the real or material world. But there are powerful reasons for believing that this is the idea that will govern the material world in the long run. The long run means forever, you know. When you read these things, you just say, how can people talk such nonsense and be professor in Harvard? That's why I always say, when somebody says, I'm a professor, you should ask, which one are you? I know that there are two. There one that talks nonsense, and that one is seeking the truth. And this one talks nonsense, you know. But he's celebrated as a great intellectual by the liberals and by those who are colonized in their mind. So, let's look at the next, the Marxist concept. The Marxists also have an idea of the end of history. The Marxist says the end of history is communism. We go through capitalism, to socialism, the end of ways is communism. How do you know that? We could ask that question, how do you know that? And the answer is, that is the conclusion for our analysis of capitalism. This is our knowledge. That's why we know it. But then, with common sense, we can say, but let's look at history and then explain to me why there is a rollback of the Russian Revolution. Is history moving forward, or will there be a time that there will be a new communist revolution in Russia? These are legitimate questions we can ask. Now we'll go to the next. There were imperial conceptions of the future. Hitler imagined that his Third Reich would last forever. So in 1940, he issued a proclamation to the German soldiers of the Western Front that says, "Soldiers of the Western Front, your hour has come. The battle beginning on this day will determine the fate of the German nation for the next 1,000 years." So, if they win, if they colonize Russia and Eastern Europe, the next 1,000 years, the history for the next 1,000 years is settled, is there. And I mentioned that Hitler took his idea of colonization of Russia from the British. And the British has also this idea. Winston Churchill spoke of the survival of the British Empire for 1,000 years. If he could beat Hitler's war machine, so after France was occupied, he expected Hitler to invade Britain. And he said, "I expect that the battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends," Hitler said the same thing, you know. He said 1,000 years of Christian civilization. "Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will stay." This was his finest hour. People don't like to say Hitler and Churchill are basically the same bunch of ideas. You know, you are trained to say Hitler is the most evil person in the world. And I will argue, and so is Winston Churchill. You see? Not because the things they are saying, because what he did to the colonized world in India. And both Hitler and Churchill were wrong, because after World War II, the Commonwealth didn't last for a few years anymore. Now, how does the empire maintain its rules? And the American empire now has a clear view of how to do it. One of the ideologues of the US empire, Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, was a national advisor of Jimmy Carter, explains that one of the pillars of maintaining an empire is cultural superiority. And it was used in the Roman Empire. He writes, "It not only legitimated Rome's rule, but it also inclined to those subject to it to desire assimilation and inclusion in the imperial structure. Cultural superiority taken for granted by the rulers and conceded by the subjugated thus reinforces imperial power." The overseas, not only the Roman Empire, but the overseas British Empire was actually acquired through a combination of exploration, trade, and conquest. But much like its Roman and Chinese predecessor or its French and Spanish rivals, it also derived a great deal of its staying power from the perception of British cultural superiority. That superiority was not only a matter of subjective arrogance on the part of the imperial class, but a perspective shared by many non-British subjects. So, what he is saying is that the colonization of the mind is a crucial way of maintaining power. The next slide, he says it explicitly. Cultural domination has been an unappreciated facet of American global power. Whatever one may think of its aesthetic values, America's mass culture and university are to be found in almost every cabinet on every continent. So here is a strategy. You bring them, you train them, you let them go back, you put them in the government, in the military, in the police, and that's how you rule the world, by controlling their mind. It's not me, an evil person, saying that about the American empire. it's the American Empire's spokesperson that is saying this. You see? So this is how they think about the future. Before I go about how we can imagine a better future, I will first imagine a horrible future. I will talk about what may lie ahead in the coming 1,000 years. And next slide, I will talk about new pandemics, ecological disasters, and World War III. And I'll do that after the break. Thank you.
Aló. Vamos a tomar asiento para continuar con la sesión, por favor, que Sandew nos espera.
The session, please take your seats. Sandew is waiting. So please sit down.
Okay. Before I talk about how we can imagine a new, better world, let me talk about how a horrible world can develop. And I'll start with pandemics. We experience the pandemics. And when it started in 2019, 2 years later, 260 million people were registered. 5 million were dead. The death rate was very low. 2% of all the people who had COVID died. And if you look at the difference between the most developed country, US and China, then the number of deaths per million in China was 0.3, and in the United States was 2,350 people died per million. Per million, right? That is huge. Almost 800 people in 2021. We are 2023 now. I think it must be now over 1 million died in the United States. In the Vietnam War, 60,000 died. Not 1 million. So the impact of the 60,000 is much bigger than the impact of the 1 million. How come? Because the colonization of the mind, they leave this out. The narrative in the United States focuses on a lot of other things than the people's health. So, next slide. We know of a few pandemics in history. The Black Death started in the Crimea in Eastern Europe. 75 to 200 million people died. The COVID, 5 million, right? Spanish flu, 50 million people died. Started in Kansas, USA. Now, in Nepal, there was a virus where the death rate was 89%. But they contained it very fast. Now imagine, next slide, imagine that a new pandemic comes with not a death rate of 2%, but of 80%. So people get infected, and those who get infected, almost a lot of them dies in a very short term. If you get the idea that World War II, costed 50 million deaths, and if the United States, would have like the COVID numbers they had, we are not talking about 1 million deaths, but probably about 40, 50 million people dying in terms of few years. And suppose it didn't catch old people, but babies, young people. What will the impact of society be if a lot of young people die in a very short term of time? Is this possible? Is it possible that we have new pandemics? Yes. Now we know a new pandemic. We don't know how it will look like, but it will be. And then the question is, who is best prepared? Who is best prepared to cope with a new endemic? And that are those societies who are built on the concept of solidarity and working together. Those societies built on individualism, they will suffer the most. That is what will happen. Because you saw it in COVID, people say, no, I don't want to wear a mask. You know, you're touching upon my individual integrity. But it is not your health only at stake, it's also the health of your mother, brother, sister, and everybody else. You see? And if the death rate is 80%, what will happen? Panic. Absolute panic. Anarchy. And then it doesn't help to say, oh, the Chinese did it. This Kung Flu, as Trump said. You know, the flu is a Kung Flu. He's joking, but he's stupidly joking. 1 million deaths is a result in your country. Next, ecological disasters. The whole ecology, nature has its own way, you know, of dealing with many problems. A volcano is a massive eruption of hot molten rock, ashes, and gases from the inner core of the earth, often accompanied by earthquake. There have been, between 1586 and 1985, a list of 22 volcanic eruptions, death numbers from 1,000 to 70,000. So the list ended in 1985, but it doesn't mean that the volcano will end. There will be a new one. We don't know where. Earthquake, we see today many of those earthquakes, and a list of 37 earthquakes shows death tolls between 20,000 and 830,000. Earthquake causing death of 830,000. Tsunamis, you know, there are a list of 22 tsunamis between 1600 and 2000. Death tolls between 1200 and 225. The last one was 225, which we experienced, you know, in 2004. Then, next slide is the tropical cyclones, hurricanes. The deadliest took place in 1870 at the death toll in the Caribbean of 22,000. You know, the other was in central Abiyala with 11,000 in 1988. Floods. The deadliest floods was in 1931 in China when the Yangtze River overflowed and cities like Wuhan and Nanjing were hit. Around 4 million people died. One study estimates that between 1951 and 1990, storms and floods were responsible for 70% of the global insured losses, 80% of the economic losses, and 52% of fatalities from natural catastrophes. And floods are here. We see that in the news. Wildfires, uncontrollable fires that usually occur in the forest. We see it in the United States, we see it in Greece, we see it there. There are other natural disasters, landslides, blizzards, avalanche. But the other one I mentioned are the one that takes a lot of lives. Then, man-made disaster, ecological disaster, global warming. Global warming that pumps carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then you can get greenhouses. A greenhouse gas is any gaseous compound in the atmosphere that is capable of absorbing infrared radiation. traps and holds heat in the atmosphere like a blanket, which ultimately leads to global warming. With higher temperatures, the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere increases, providing more blanketing and cushioning it to become even warmer. Let's look at the impact of global warming. Next. The sea surface temperature greater than 26 Celsius Fahrenheit. When the temperature goes up, you get hurricanes. Not the normal hurricanes, you get hurricanes because they derive their energy from the ocean heats. And hurricanes can be very destructive. And a number of named hurricanes has increased the past years. The storms have become longer and more intense. And the hurricanes are changing. The hurricanes of the past were less intensive, but the hurricanes of the future, because of global warming, will be more horrible. And global warming leads to floods and droughts and scarcity of drinking water, the greater probability of tsunamis, the decline of biodiversity. So, if you see global warming as a man-made catastrophe for the future, you would think the most sensible thing is to work together to save the planet. And if you look at how US President Trump was saying, the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make the US manufacturing non-competitive, you think, how stupid are the leaders of the most important nation in the world talking these kinds of nonsense? You see? And it is accepted as, that's how it is. Then I'll go to World War I, II, and III. World War, if we go to next. Yeah, the slide for the World Wars. Yes. Two has been there, and the third one might be coming. So let's look at World War I. Next one. World War I started with the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1940. World War I lasted for 4 years. There were two major coalitions: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire at one hand, France, Britain, Russia, and the Allied forces. Before 1914, the Russian Empire was ruled by Tsar Nicholas, the Austrian Empire by the Habsburg monarchy, the Ottoman Empire by the Ottoman Sultanate, in Germany by Kaiser Wilhelm III, the British Empire was ruled by a constitutional monarchy, the French Empire by a parliamentary republic. And these forces were competing forces for land and spheres of influence. 4 years lasted World War I. And within 4 years, the world changed dramatically. Russia, the Tsar was toppled. Communists came to power. The Habsburg Empire was dissolved. And you get Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Baltic Republic, Poland, Italy. There was no Habsburg Empire anymore. The Ottoman Empire, Sultan Mehmed IV stepped down. There was no Ottoman Empire. And a secular Republic of Turkey was created with Kemal Atatürk as the first president. The German Empire ceased to exist with the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm III and the establishment of the Weimar Republic. Now, imagine, the people in 1914 who started this all never imagined that 4 years later they wouldn't exist. And yet, it happened with 20 million people dead. You see? So let's go to World War III. It started with the German invasion of, of Poland. Before World War III, the world was dominated basically by Germany, France, and Britain. And obviously Holland had their colonies, but German was the strongest power in America, in Europe. And both Hitler and Churchill thought that they would establish an empire that would last for 1,000 years. But what happened? It cost 50 million people dead. The US replaced France and Britain as the world superpower. Before World War II, when you talk in Europe about America, it wasn't associated with imperial power. In 1940, when you talk about imperial power in Europe, it was associated with France and Britain. So Europe was divided in Western Europe under US hegemony and Eastern Europe under Soviet hegemony. Those people at the beginning of the war didn't think that that would be the result of the war in Europe. So you get two new superpowers, and the Cold War started with nuclear weapons as the main deterrence. And then you get decolonization process, political decolonization. Dozens of countries, year after year, got independence. The old colonial empires crumbled. And you got now new international economic and political institutions that didn't exist before. United Nations, you had the League of Nations, but that was dissolved. United Nations, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, these are institutions that came after the war. Now, if we are thinking about a future world, based on World War I and II, you can understand that world wars are possible. It is possible that the world comes into a situation of total conflict with powers fighting each other on a global scale. You can understand that because we had two. Why do you think that the third is impossible? It is not. But the Third World War, if you look at the next one, the Third World War, World War III will be a nuclear war. And that is the most scary thing. It's good that we don't think about it every day, because you won't be able to sleep about what I'm going to tell you now. In 2021, there were 9 countries with nuclear arms: China, North Korea, France, India, Israel, Pakistan, Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States. Together they have 13,000 nuclear warheads. Russia and the US possess 80%. Russia has 6,000 something, and the US 5,000 something. China 350, Korea 50 to 40, and Israel 90. And the nuclear arsenal of the US are in the US and 5 countries outside of the US: Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. So, a nuclear war, the infrastructure of a nuclear war is already here. It's not an idea. The nuclear heads are there. Will it ever be used? Well, it was used. It was used in Japan, the first. And the decision to develop a nuclear war in the United States was taken before the start of World War II. People think that, oh, United States bombed Hiroshima, and the reason they did it is that they thought that, they could end the war very soon, and then they start developing the bomb. No. The US empire envisioned already before World War II that they would become the superior power of the world, and that having a nuclear bomb would be part of it. The decision was taken before. And they developed it, and 3 months before bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they had the discussion, which targets, which of the cities are we going to do? And they selected all these targets, made a long list and a short list. And they knew what the effect would be. They knew that they would instantly kill hundreds of thousands of people. So, why did they do it? They did it because they want to test the bomb. They wanted to test it. Because Japan already was on the verge of giving up. They knew it. One of the studies says the use of the atomic bomb, most experts now believe, was totally unnecessary. Even people who supported the decision for various reasons acknowledge that almost certainly the Japanese would have surrendered before the initial planning for November. Even the US Strategic Bombing Survey stated that officially in 1946. What you see here, people take decisions on using the nuclear bomb without any consideration of human lives. You know, they built up an argument for it, but it not need to be a rational argument. Now, here are all the nuclear weapons. How do you think a new war, how do you think it will happen? It will not happen like in Japan. You bomb a city and wait and see what the effect is. It will not that you throw a bomb and I throw a bomb. It will only look tit for tat. If one country start dropping a bomb, it will be all-out war. It's not waiting if the second one will come or the third one will come. So, the planning of the military goes along those lines. They don't think about one bomb. They think about what they call the first strike. But to give you an idea of the types of bombs we have now, go to the types of nuclear bombs. There are 3 types: atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, neutral bombs. But the power of the Nagasaki bomb was 8 kilograms of plutonium was used, the size of a grapefruit, they said. The temperature it generated when a bomb explodes is over 100 million degrees Celsius. And the accompanying pressure is millions of times greater than the normal atmospheric pressure. So if you get a nuclear bomb and you live in Hiroshima, it's like you're at the center of the sun. You evaporate immediately. In Hiroshima, it was 15 kilotons of TNT, and the Nagasaki bomb had 21 kilotons. A nuclear bomb of 2002 has 20 million tons. Can you imagine the difference between Hiroshima and Nagasaki? 21 kilotons and that is 20 million tons. Not a 1 ton, you know? That is what we are talking about. So, suppose we have a nuclear war. What will happen? Imagine that there are many people who are writing about it, discussing, researching. It's not that, you know, I base myself on all this research. And they use the term called nuclear winter. The nuclear winter will be caused after the bomb has fallen, right? The nuclear winter will be caused mostly by small particles of dust that are raised by nuclear explosions well up to into the stratosphere, the region of the atmosphere about 50,000 feet. where the temperature is very low and the air is quiet, with no clouds and little wind. Large nuclear explosions where the fireball touches the ground will vaporize, melt, and pulverize the surface of the air, sucking large quantities of condensates and fine dust into a hot column of air that rises into the stratosphere. These particles may remain in the stratosphere for as long as a year. They will blot out the sun and the surface of the air will cool. In addition, the bombs that exploded in cities or near forests will produce great firestorms which will lift massive quantities of smoke particles into the atmosphere below the stratosphere. The ignition of oil storage tanks and coal piles will add to the smoke produced. The smoke will also blot out the sun, although much of it will fall out of the lower atmosphere in a month or so. Up to a third of the smoke, however, may be lifted by the large firestorms into the stratosphere to contribute to the long-term dust effects. So the dust and the smoke spread over the entire hemisphere, resulting in an average light level of 5% of the normal level. So 95% of sun is gone, light is gone, and that's why you get a nuclear winter. It will inject nitrogen oxidant into the stratosphere, and the result of high energy ultraviolet light down to the Earth's surface will damage the eyes of humans and animals. Animals would be blinded and would die because they are not able to catch their prey. Humans can wear sunglasses or stay indoors. Global temperature could drop 15 to 25 degrees Celsius, and that could last for centuries. Food production and distribution would come to a halt, and a billion people might die immediately, and another billion people would be so seriously injured that they would die within a month. Within a year, another billion would die of starvation and disease. So the rest would die slowly through starvation. Next. And there will be small groups of people here and there who would manage to eke out an existence. There would be some radiation-induced cancer, genetic abnormalities, and it would be rampant for decades. It would be a total collapse of civilization and organized agriculture, and it will destroy civilization maybe for the next 10,000 years. So this is the effect. People know that when you have a nuclear war, this is what will happen. They know it, And yet, there is no mechanism to destroy all these nuclear arms. In fact, there is a mechanism to start it. There are mechanisms to start it. So, you ask yourself, who wants to start a nuclear war? And who prepares for it? And the most likely party is the US. Two political scientists of the US wrote an article in 2006. And they started to think about the idea of a first strike. He said by early 90s, the nuclear arsenal of the United States and Soviet Union had grown so large and sophisticated that neither country could entirely destroy the other's retaliatory force by launching first, even with a surprise attack. So, but that was in the previous part. But now the US has developed the capability of a first strike. So the US have developed a system that if they put up a nuclear war within a first strike, then the Russian arsenal, because they are the major one, but also the Chinese, will be obliterated. So basically, the strategy of the first strike, next one, is to tell the Soviet Union, we are capable of wiping you out in a first strike. And go to number 3 next. These guys in the US, next, they built a computer model to simulate a hypothetical attack on Russia's nuclear arsenal. And they used information that was available there. And they said, we assign US nuclear warheads to Russia on the basis of 2 criteria. The most accurate weapons were aimed at the hardest targets, and the fastest arriving weapons at the Russian forces that can react most quickly. Because Russia is essentially blind to a submarine attack from the Pacific and would have great difficulty detecting the approach of low-flying, stealthy nuclear-armed cruise missiles, we target each Russian weapon system with at least 1 submarine-based warhead and cruise missile. An attack organized in this manner would give the Russian leaders virtually no warning. And they say next, according to our model, such an attack would have a good chance of destroying every Russian bomber. And the things are not based on the best case assumptions. They argue that if we attack the Russian and 20% of our weapons reach it, so 80% will be ineffective. But even if 20% are effective, it will kill 50% already of all the nuclear heads in Russia. So you see, people are putting out the plans, they're discussing, they're making the models. And the most scary thing of all is the next, is this. The Russian response, because the Russians read these things also, and the Russians' response is known with the term dead hand. And one author explains it. The Soviets were fearful of American missiles in Europe reaching the Kremlin. So in the early summer of 1982, when the Pentagon circulated a plan that called on US forces to be ready to fight a protracted nuclear war to decapitate the Soviet leadership, the Russians developed a system. Let me see. They drew up plans for a retaliated strike based on the concept that the Russian leadership have been liquidated. And that is a fully automatic system in which the computers launches this. So the Americans have killed the Soviets leadership, next strike, and then computers take over, memorize all these things, and fire all the 6,000 nuclear weapons of Russia through the world. And the system was fully tested in 1984. It was tested. If you read the thing, you think, man, in what kind of world are we living in? And if you look at who has the motive to start the war next, you will see that the American presidents give the motive. Bush in 2006, the only alternative to American leadership is a dramatically more dangerous and anxious world. Barack Obama, those who argue otherwise, who suggest that America is in decline or has seen its global leadership slip away, are either misreading history or engaged in partisan politics. America must always lead on the world stage. If we don't do it, no one else will do it. The military is always the backbone of that leadership. Donald Trump brought the world almost to a local nuclear war when he killed Qasem Soleimani. You know, Joe Biden, there's going to be a new world order out there, and we have got to lead it. America has 800,000 military bases across the globe. So there is the motive. There is the infrastructure, there is the planning, all is there. There are only two nations, countries with a no first use. China and India has make a pledge, we won't use nuclear weapons first. And the process, the way a nuclear war might start next is what we saw in 9/11. On September 11, writes an author, much before much of the world was even aware what has happened in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania, the Bush administration had raised the country's nuclear alert codes from DEFCON 6 to 2, the highest state of alert before the launch code is operable. Russia, the country with the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world, almost certainly responded in kind. As a result, thousands of nuclear weapons stood poised on hair trigger alert, ready to be launched by the president of either country with a decision of just 3 minutes. The intercontinental nuclear armed ballistic missiles controlled by these codes have a 30-minute transit time from Russia and America vice versa, and they can't be recalled after that. And DEFCON, Defense Readiness Condition, is a system that describes different levels of readiness, and they were already at the at level 2 before the launch. Now, what makes it even more scary is that the people producing nuclear arms are not states, are private companies. So private companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, they are involved in these processes. And these companies who profit from the military-industrial complex, they put their people in the policy-making decisions. When the war in Iraq started, the guy who led the whole campaign, Bruce Jackson, was from Lockheed Martin. He put up the 202 Coalition for the Liberation of Iraq, and drafted the statement that was signed by Europe, by France, Germany, other members. And he basically, from Lockheed Martin, organized the invasion of Iraq. In the government of President Biden sits a black man, Lloyd Austin, as Secretary of Defense. He has been on the board of Raytheon Technology since 2016. Private companies of the military industrial company are steering the course to war. And they profit from it. Next, the study of Brown University, conducted between 2000 and 2021, says that the US has spent $40 trillion on defense. 1/4 to 1/3 of all these contracts went to these 5 companies. So, if you see how a nuclear war would come about, you understand that World War III is not a distant thing. It might happen. Next. So then we look in how will it happen. We know that the US is preparing for World War. And I will skip some slides because I want to focus on the possibility where a nuclear war will start maybe very soon if we don't look out. So we'll go to the slide of a nuclear war in Western Asia. If you go to that slide, Israel has 90 nuclear weapons. And if you see a nuclear war in Western Asia, yes, next. Yes. Next. I'll leave Russia, Putin, China. I gave an analysis next. You know, it's an analysis of how, you know, they wanted to position nuclear wars in Ukraine. Next. Next. Yes, here. So, if you look at what is happening in Israel, occupied Palestine, this is what might happen. Next slide. Yes. Go to resistance against Israel number 1. 1964, 16 years after the foundation of Israel, PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, was established. They carry out armed struggle, and they were brutally driven out by the Israelis, had to retreat to Jordan, Lebanon, eventually to Tunisia. Even there they were not safe. They were bombed by the Israelis in 1982 in Tunis. And the negotiation led to the Oslo Accords and the two-state solutions. So the Israelis and the West thought with the Oslo Accord they had achieved peace with the two-state solution. But the two-state solution didn't work. Next. So in 2002, you get the Intifada. And so even they had appeased the PLO, from below there came resistance in 2002. Led to a large conflict that left 3,000 Palestinians and 1,000 Israelis dead. There was a ceasefire. The next, you get Gaza. Resistance against Gaza, where 1 million Palestinians live and 8,000 Jewish settlers. And the 8,000 Jewish settlers were driven out. In 2006, Hamas won the legislature's elections. 2008, the first war on Gaza started. 2009, the second one. 2012, the first, another one. 2014, another one. 2021, another one. What do you see? What is your conclusion? The conclusion is that the resistance will not stop. So if the resistance will not stop, what will the result of the resistance be in the coming years? And then you study Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, PLO, Islamic Jihad. You study the speeches of these leaders there. And then you see they have a long-term strategy for resistance. And Iran plays a crucial role in that resistance. And they have a strategy. The first element, next, is unity. Normally, Hamas, PLO are fighting each other. And now leaders of Hamas are praising Yasser Arafat. On the ground, the militants of PLO and Hamas try to work together. So unity. The second thing is create a general atmosphere of insecurity in the West Bank. There are millions of settlers, Israeli settlers living in the West Bank. You don't see it in the Western news, but now if you follow Israeli news channels, almost every day you will see, oh, a car has exploded, somebody has stabbed an Israeli there, somebody has shot some. This feeling of insecurity is there. That's a tragedy. Then the next one is that involve the Arabs which are in Israel in the resistance. Because normally they were, you know, apart. 2 million living within the 700 kilometers wall that separate Israel from the West Bank. Get them involved, and in the last conflict, they came out in numbers in the street to support the resistance. So the resistance, all these factions are building within Israel, in the Arab population, they're building the nucleus of resistance. The fourth element is the diaspora. 6 million people living in the diaspora. They always try to get them involved, but now try to get them involved in the preparation of a war. And mind you, the European Union annually pays $600 million to the PLO, to Abbas. They pay 600 million to get the government rolling and the security apparatus. And the fifth element is the belief, like to Sandew Hira, the belief that a military victory of Israel is possible. Because for a long time, the resistance was on the level, you put a record there, you in Israel, and you protest. Because you can't win military, because military, the Israeli army is superior. And now they are saying, no, militarily we can win. They managed to build 500 kilometers of tunnels in Gaza. And in the last war, Israel was only possible to destroy 5%. They built indigenous Palestinian engineers with the knowledge of Iran and Hezbollah, built a stockpile of rockets. And the Israeli Iron Drone in the last war could intercept 90%, but if 15 to 20 rockets per day were in the cities, they created a lot of problems for the Israelis. They had a loss of $100 million per day. The sixth element is the next war is not between Hamas and Israel. It is between Hamas, Israel, Hezbollah, Syria, Yemen, and that will be a war. The last war, General Soleimani was present in the military operation rooms of Hamas in Damascus. They had an operation room in Damascus where they communicated around the war. Hezbollah has a stockpile of 150,000. The Israelis know it, rockets. And in the next war, they will launch these rockets. And what will happen now is that another factor will come into play. Jihadists inspired by this war will flock to Israel, helping the Palestinians by the tens of thousands. So, if you look at how the Israelis, if we go to the next slide, how the Israelis are preparing for this. One of the reports said, we see that with the support of Iran, Hezbollah has made advances in signal intelligence and communications. And they are expected to use these upgraded weapons and capabilities to go to an offensive, not defensive. Now Hezbollah can decide when to start the war, not Israel. And they might attempt to seize the initiative. And their preparations, what we see now, are battle plans for land and seaborne insertion coming through the sea into Israel to carry out commando-style raids. And given the range of the missiles of Hezbollah possession, the battle space in the next war will likely be larger than the traditional southern Lebanon and northern Israel. Hezbollah has put out a map where they say in the next war we can reach every part of Israel, the north of Israel, the south of Israel. We know where the nuclear arms are. We know where the headquarters are of the military strategists. So, you see that we are now in a situation where if a war, the next war comes in Western Asia, it's not like the previous war. There are some rockets, Israel responds, and that's it. It is a war that might develop into a situation in which Israel decides to throw 90 nuclear bombs on Iran. They're going to do it in Gaza. They're going to do it on Iran. That is where the nuclear war can start. And if they do it on Iran, what will the Americans do? Because they won't do it without consultation of the Americans. So if they do it with the permission of the Americans, what will the Russians do? And the Chinese and the North Koreans? Are they going to say, oh, the Americans have decided to take on Iran before they come to us? And then, that's where the nuclear war might start, you see? And this is spoken openly about by Israel military generals. They are talking about it, you know? So, we hope that this never will occur in our lifetime, a nuclear war. But we must be very conscious of the fact that the danger is there and that maybe Israel won't survive and the people of Israel, once the war started, you know, imagine that they are losing and basically dissolve Israel without using the nuclear bomb. That is what you hope as the best outcome. But mind you, we live in a dangerous world. Okay, I'm going now, next. I'm going now to talk the last 10, 15 minutes about imagining a new, better world. And I think that you have to believe first that a better world is possible. That it starts with that idea. It starts with the idea that we know that there's a horrible future possible, but with that knowledge, we are not going to bed and cry the whole day, oh my God, what will happen? No, you go to bed and say, knowing the dangers, we think that a better world is possible. And the thing is, it need not last 1,000 years. It might take a generation, 2 generations. In order to explain that to you, I'll give you how our sense of time deceives us when we talk about history. The difference between 1980 and 1970 is 52 years. In your memory, you know, that's a long time ago, a century ago. But within 50 years, 52 years, in half a century, the world changed dramatically. 2 world wars, 1 pandemic, you know, the majority, you know, there was no internet, no personal, no mobile phone, all this was not there. In 1970 and 2022 is also 52 years old. It's 52 years. But 52 years which we already went into. And then we see also dramatic changes. China, India have risen from, you know, to major powers. Soviet bloc has dissolved. Iran has become a major political force. We had a pandemic there. Internet technology is there. We have iPhones. Within 50 years. And now you can imagine what will the next 50 years look like? Is it the same as now? Or can you imagine that it might be very different, completely different? So if you understand that it might be completely different, then you ask yourself, what will it make it be completely different? And here is the difference between Eurocentric science and decolonizing the mind. Eurocentric science is a separation of the research from the researcher. Separation from object and subject. So you have a researcher that looks at political process and writes a thesis and an article. In DTM, the researcher and the object of research are one. When we talk about political theory, we talk about how we change the world, not how processes works. That is happening in Venezuela now, where Chavez took the initiative. We are going to change Venezuela. There was not a political scientist who did that. There's no economist who said that. There's somebody who believes in another future. We are going to do it. No professor has ever led a revolution in the world. It were people from the ground who says we want to change our world. Once you realize that, then you realize that the force of change doesn't come from science, doesn't come from the colonial rulers. It comes from people who created, freed their mind from mental slavery, emancipated themselves, and translated that new knowledge into action in building organization, in building networks, in attending courses like this, and going back home and tell your mother, I went to this course, and this guy was saying there are 2 professors, for now I'm looking for the other one. And you talk about how mental slavery works in your attitude, and you are the agents of the change of the world. And once we realize that, we can see that you are not the only one. There are hundreds of millions of people around the world, and sometimes we see them in revolutionaries in millions in the street. I was here when the Guaido thing developed, and there was a large demonstration. I was perplexed here when we did there, and nobody moved because everybody was, there were hundreds of thousands of people here, you see? When Soleimani was killed, there were millions in the streets, not in one city, in all the cities, mourning Soleimani, you see? So, you start with a belief that another world is possible. And those that were created out of the world are us, not others. And everything we do, the small steps we do, a conference, demonstrations, something that we connect with other people like Shan and Max coming from Curacao. So these are small steps in this bigger world. And I think that if our knowledge system sees that that's what we do, if we move from reparations to reconstruction, we are really able to create that new world civilizations. And it might not take 1,000 years, maybe it's the next 50 years. So thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Well, it is not only possible but also necessary. because the alternatives that were shown today shouldn't exist. As it was said, socialism or barbarism. So, thank you, Sandew, because our end is open to hope, to uniting ourselves in the struggle. And making these seminars is precisely part of that struggle. So, if there are any questions or comments, please come forward. Good morning. Thank you for this exchange and enriching knowledge we've had during the whole week. I think it is important to say that all the dissertation we had today was fundamental, where we talked about the process of colonizing the mind from the scenario of human beings as expanding in nature. And I believe that colonization as a cultural process of human generations throughout history has generated a process of domination in each territory and region. And this expansive vision in nature from because we humans are part of the species. I think we are part of the animal kingdom. And we humans have put ourselves over other species. So this is one of the fundamental elements we must consider when defining colonization, because sometimes we do not recognize the particularities of each territory and species. Considering this, I remember that once I was in a dissertation with a few professors, and one of them always had the dilemma of nature and humans, and that the human species is superior. And I told her back then that nature and each species have a cultural component, because we have the example of birds, they have their different nests. And if we go to humans, we decorate, we have different relations with our environment, cultural expressions in our environment. We might not communicate in the same way, but they do have their own codes of communication. And this is fundamental when reviewing what colonization is and how humans, as another species, have put ourselves above nature. And this is like a parallel world that's not related to nature. Regarding wars, nowadays there's a new configuration of warfare, including and considering what happened during the pandemic. There are silent wars. You already talked about this. COVID-19 had a considerable number of deaths that goes above previous wars, and that's still out there. There have been some studies that state that each of us is a receptor amongst other elements. I don't know if that's true, but we have receptors through vaccines, and we are like bombs in all scenarios and can trigger these wars. So I think wars will be environmental. because they are latent. All processes of transformation and destruction of nature because of man to build a different environment. That's my opinion on what we reviewed today.
Can I make a comment on the sisters? I think one of the conclusions which I draw from your intervention, one of the conclusions that I draw from your intervention is this. We need to link the movement for decolonizing the mind with the movement of ecology. Why? I explain the possible disasters, not man-made and including man-made, that we will experience the coming years. And around the world, there is an insecurity about it, but the Eurocentrism doesn't build an ecological movement with different ideas about the relation between humans and nature. They built a carbon dioxide movement. That is their movement. Their movement is about carbon dioxide, how do you reduce it, etc. While their movement should be about how to link ideas about humans and nature, new ideas. And I think those ideas have been articulated in the global south, and we need to connect it with the global north. And that is what I think this intervention makes me think of. Thank you.
Tenemos 3 preguntas más aquí del público. Primero el compañero. Vamos a dar solo 3 derechos de palabra más por el tiempo.
Have 3 more questions because of time constraints. First, we will have the 3 questions, and then Sandew will answer the 3 questions. And I think Chucho also wanted to say something. And then Guillermo will close. Good afternoon. Yes, I have a question. Besides thanking you for this week we have enjoyed with you and the efforts you have made to help us have tools and arguments to continue this struggle for decolonizing our mind and helping others to do so. But since a few years ago, I was focusing on this phenomena you were explaining yesterday of the market that sometimes has been seen as the enemy by the capitalist system after they have benefited from it. From epistemology, we want to build a different concept of market by taking into account what China and other countries have accomplished with their different market from what we already know about markets from capitalism. Have you ever thought about developing a different concept of market? That's my question. Hi, I would also like to thank you. I have been following the conference via Zoom. I have 2 concerns. First, I think universities are not the ones who should produce new knowledge, because that's also part of colonizing the mind. We must produce knowledge everywhere. You were talking about the different sources of knowledge. And one of the fundamental aspects is attacking the issue of children from preschool. If we continue doing what we are currently doing, we sell scissors and crayons to kids, we're not creating a system of community. They are individual, and then they also have problems because they lose their scissors, their notebooks. So we must start at the beginning, so kids start feeling like they are part of a community. That's my first concern. And the second one is a question you were mentioning yesterday. What's the model Venezuelans will follow? For us, it is very difficult to find our own model because we're an oil country, which is very different from the rest of Abya Yala. And having such a big oil industry has affected us because of how similar that makes us to Yankees in the United States and makes us different from Abya Yala. And also, our heroes, our historic heroes, come from enlightenment. So we have to be aware of the fact that it is harder for us to find our own identity. Chavez was working on that, but his labor was interrupted. I am Erika Rasquero from Aragua. Well, my question is, what's the model, the task Venezuelans must follow, which is what our colleague was saying. But using a work we're doing from FONACYT and the Ministry of Science and Technology, I said that here in Venezuela, we are working from an institutional point of view, but related to communities at the same time. I had the opportunity of seeing since 2003 a research that's being done in Afro-Araguañas communities. And there's a gastronomical resistance that in those villages and some leaders from Chuao and Cuyagua, they are against the gastronomical industry trying to decolonize food. So, for example, candies, and I'm sorry for Iran and Turkey, but we're receiving lots of candies from Turkey and Iran that are filled with harmful chemicals and fat. So here we're trying to make it with 100% cocoa, and the leaders are very interrelated with alliances, and they have decided they should study all the food products we receive from Ocumare. They usually use manufactured products since they're closer to the city. They use manufactured products that are filled with fat. And Chipilin, that it's from these other villages, he's working with people in Ocumare and is proposing to give in healthier options. We don't call it decolonization because there's a theory from one of our leaders that says we cannot talk about decolonization if resistance in Afro territories has been resistant for not being colonized. But in the white system, the hegemonic system, you have explained with lots of details, they are imposing an idea and continue colonizing us in the case of food.
Okay. Thank you very much. First, there has already been thinking the relationship between the market and progress. Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador and also economist, he put that in a conclusion. He says, the market ought to be a slave, not a master. So, being a slave means you, the master is the state, the government, the people. They are setting out the rules for how the market should operate. While in capitalism, the market is the master and we are the slaves. See? So that concept is important. Then the role of the university in knowledge production and other sources of knowledge productions. I think, so it's not other sources of knowledge, it's other sources of knowledge production. You know, I mentioned the role of artists and revolutionaries and spiritual people who formulated, articulated ideas. So if now we set up a new system of knowledge production, then we have to develop some infrastructure and strategy about the relationship between the universities and other producers of knowledge. While now, the university claims to be the sole producer of knowledge and operates like that with its finances, its structures, etc. But if you acknowledge that there are other sources of production of knowledge, valid knowledge, right, then obviously now you have to rethink the whole infrastructure strategy of knowledge production. You know, in the West, the other sources are often ridiculized, you know, as not taken serious. But in a decolonial context, we have to take it serious and then look at the models. And then, very important question that you posed, and I discussed it with Guillermo. What model is Venezuela following? And I can never assume to be so arrogant as to be the one who is having an opinion on it. So I won't tell somebody how it is. I will ask you how it is. You know, I won't tell you. I would ask you, and I will learn from it. So I have such many interesting discussions with Guillermo. So when I talk about what is the Venezuelan theoretical conception of revolution, obviously it is very clear that then you ask yourself, who are you looking for? Where are you looking to? And then he mentions names which I have never heard of, which are so familiar with you: Rodriguez, Bolivar, Chavez, Miranda, and so forth. I read Chavez in English, but I never, Bolivar, I heard a name. I never thought about what did Bolivar say. And now I'm learning from it. Then me being a student of political theory, I then think, oh, what is Bolivar's conception of the nation? What is Bolivar's conception of society? And I don't know, but what I see, it was not class. It was, he looked at, I think it was ethnicity. There were three things, you know. I don't know exactly. But what I do, I say, okay, if I hear this, then I look, how did others think about community? And then I guess sooner or later, people will develop the theoretical model in Venezuela. But if in Venezuela, people are stuck in the European Enlightenment and say there are only two things, either we go capitalist or socialist and there's nothing else, then I'm afraid that we'll see what we see in other countries, which is a dead end. But when you say, okay, there are other avenues possible, and when I look at Chavez and read some of his works, he comes up with this concept of socialism of the 21st century. and saying, oh, we could have something that looks like socialism, but because of the problems of the 20th century Stalinism and all these horrible things, we need to think of something else. Socialism of the 20th century that takes some of the elements and combine it. And these are building stones for a theoretical model that I see developing. And I would be interested in the conversation of learning about it. So I hope to come back at one time and then listen to those people who are explaining it. And then decolonizing food. I think this is, on the individual level, maybe the most important things. I'm very much interested in because I'm very colonized in food. You see, I'm always thinking, how can I get lose weight? I see how this problem of colonizing food, and then I wonder, how come that in other civilizations, you know, when I see pictures of people, you see sometimes paintings with people who have obesitas, but on the level of the majority of the people, they don't, even just healthy people, you don't see it. And I wonder that capitalism has created such a system that food, that it destroyed all the healthy elements and addicted it to all the unhealthy elements. And now they are trying to repair it, not reconstruct it. So you go and you try to lose weight by running rather by having a healthy lifestyle, you see? So I think this thing of research into how did colonization impacted food habits by the industry. How did the industry set itself up to produce those foods that are unhealthy? Because of the money mechanism and so involved. So yes, these are very interesting topics because we see that decolonizing the world is not just about philosophy and other things. It goes to a lot of things.
Chucho, adelante.
No necesito un doctor. Professor, thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir, for this intellectual maroon discussion that you have brought here. I remember that when you went in and out, you started with a song of Bob Marley. Remember the beginning of the session? And if we don't emancipate our mentality of slaves, we are in for it. We are going to plunder. We will be in the bottom of the tank for a long time. But when we speak of emancipation, of mental liberation, I believe we have to see this has to do with a historical continuity. And this is the concrete case of Suriname, for example. Suriname has a close link with Venezuela, which is very interesting, by the way. I remember that in the year 1984, in General Files or Archives of India, I found a document that was very interesting on the flight of Maroons from Suriname to the delta of the Orinoco River, which is here. And él nunca supo eso. Eso es muy importante. Eso es muy importante. Por esa conexión, sí. I have the document. And I'm hungry. I found the document afterwards. So it was very important because I remember that once when I was for the first time to El Callao, that by the way I went with Mercedes here and Professor Edis, we met there a descendant of a Maroon in Ciudad Bolívar, which is in the southern part of Venezuela, sir. And he came from Suriname, and his name was Doshi. And one of the forefathers of Calypso in Trinidad and here in Venezuela was the Tambu Bambu. And he would take bamboo this size, he would make holes in it, and he would go, the descendants of Maroons in Ciudad Bolívar, the southern, in like a carnival, they would be doing like this, like that. They would be walking like that, or playing like that. They preserved that essential element that they had, and that had a great influence in the Calypso of Callao, which is a typical dance here in an area of Venezuela. The liberation of Suriname started first by liberating the mind. That was the beginning, with two great Maroons who were Benny Basito. Do you remember? No? Okay. And Benti. He was another one of the great Maroons. And they started to create liberated zones, or their mentality, they projected it in a certain territory. Their mentality, a way of thinking, was projected in certain areas. This was an extraordinary event, and besides, the Dutch had to negotiate with them. And afterwards, there was another work which is very interesting when they achieved an agreement in the 1970s or 1980s of the 20th century, because they go to Ghana so they go, which was interesting, of how that mentality of corporeity, of enslavement was a pivotal element. And there were the Saramacas there, or the Maroons from Suriname. Here in Venezuela, we all know that there existed cumbes, in Brazil, quilombos, in Colombia, palenque. Those are different names. So that is an element was essential and fundamental, because in these old Dutch colonies, as happened in Curacao with Tula, the rebellion of Tula, or the Tula Rebellion, in the year 1795, was like a repercussion of the rebellion of Jose Leonardo Chirinos. It was also as a repetition of the Afro-Indigenous people in the St. Vincent and the Grenadine Islands. Here, a great Afro-Indigenous man called Satuje, who today is the independence hero of the Grenadines. And that from there they went to create another space where they liberated in Honduras, which are the famous Califunda. But it started, you have to start to be mentally convinced. No one does it for you. You have to convince yourself. No one's going to do it for no governments if we don't assume it ourselves. As Maroons of the 21st century, we will continue to be in this bad situation. Thank you, brother. Thank you. I wanted to invite now Jose Julian Villalba, Director of Spaces and Strategies in Science and Technology, who brings us a greeting from the Minister of Science and Technology here. So I give him the floor. First of all, on behalf of the Minister, Gabriela Jimenez, Vice President of Science and Technology, Health and Education, Education, who is not here right now because she is developing, holding tasks now that have to do much with this topic. A meeting right now of the group of the 77 plus China in Havana, Cuba right now, where they are debating some of the elements, the most concrete elements that have to do with this debate held these days. Also, I would like to give you greetings from the Vice Minister Francisco Uran, who works in IVIC, and he is also locked up in doing some tasks there. I wanted to mention a historical fact, relatively recent, that puts in evidence part of what you have said here, and that we thank you very, very much for your contributions made during this week to the discussion and the debate in Venezuela on these issues that are so relevant. A fact that put in evidence the colonial reason in the most crude and brutal way possible in our continent. Well, let's imagine just for a minute a country whose territory is a little smaller than Caracas, the city here, with a population of barely 100,000 inhabitants, more or less the same as Tucupita, which is a small city here in the eastern part of the country, with an army of a bit more than 1,000 men, being invaded 40 years ago, the 25th October of 1983, by the main power of the world, by more than 7,000 men with the most sophisticated weapons, and I mean by grenades. Grenades. This occurred barely 40 years ago in Grenada, and the disproportion, military disproportion, the disproportion of reasons, the disproportion of alleged reasons was so brutal that it paralyzed for a few minutes many people. The excuse was an airport that was being constructed in Grenada, where there was a participation of approximately 700 Cuban people. The majority were construction workers that worked there, many of which were assassinated during the invasion, just like the majority of that precarious army of Grenada. To this operation, it was called, the North Americans gave it a name that was brutal, called Ocean Fury. No, Fury, Urgent Fury, excuse me, which is atrocious what happened not long ago, that occurred very soon, not long ago, and it is evident and shows what is the colonial reason that is still there and that continues to occur just the same and operating there. It's still there. This is a task that we have. This is what happened the 25th of October. Institute Simon Bolivar of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has it in its books. And we have there with the Center of Social Transformations of IVIC, which is also which is an organizing entity here for this event. Another concrete fact that I want to mention that you mentioned, sir, what happens to the decolonization of food. That is key. I want to remind you, because I think that it is a very interesting topic, because in Venezuela, just like in many Andean countries, this is the area where the potato has its origin. The potato that has been expropriated, ideologically speaking, because we have French potatoes here. They call them French potatoes, that is French fries. And there are different variants of the potato, but they put any name that occurs to them, but none that is associated to its true origin, which is here, Venezuela. And in Venezuela, up until not long ago, until recently, being a zone of origin of potato, because the seed of the potato that was consumed in the country was bought from Canada. And the expropriation of the potato reached a point where the seeds that we planted here, we bought them mainly from Canada. And right now,
because of a double coincidence, which is that our Andean peasants have preserved for many years the seeds of the originary potatoes of their area, and the fact that from science and technology we have supported them and with the application of new methods and techniques, we have recovered that originary seed in the different climate levels of the country, and today we no longer import potatoes nor seeds. We are self-sufficient in the harvesting of potatoes, and I think this is an excellent example in the case of food decolonization. And as we did with potatoes, we will now work with corn, uh, plantain, and yuca, which is a very important contribution to our gastronomical, national gastronomical knowledge of also the Afro-Venezuelan people. So I wanted to give this example of potatoes because it is related to the debate of colonialism. This isn't a topic we should only discuss at cafes, for writing articles, and we must say this, although some people do not like it, but it is part of a conspiration. Chucho is a conspirator. I met him 40 years ago, and he was already conspiring the same way as many people, Beatriz, Juan de Dios. Many of them were conspiring in these discussions regarding decolonization. And it is a conspiration for having political concrete action and to stop to cultivate the processes that inspired Chavez, Fidel, if we want to talk about other territories. And in general, they should have concrete political actions beyond reflection, beyond being concerned. And in this ministry, we are ready to be part of that plot, that conspiration, that discussion. And we're also ready to try to translate these into actions. For example, the recovery of potatoes as our food traditions. We are now going to continue. Sandew will send his book to our Minister Gabriela Jimenez, who has supported us through Julian. Well, now I would like to invite our colleagues from the Center of Social Transformation from IBEC, Eisamar Ochoa and Jimena, because Sandy would also like to give them their book, so it is available at their Knowledge Center.
the technicians, the people working behind the scenes. I want to give a special thanks to people who I really drove to madness. These are the translators. And every time I need to prepare a PowerPoint and send to them and translate it, and I stress, but they stress double more than I did. When I told my wife, Sitla, we're going to Venezuela, and I said, oh, they're going to do translations. And the last time I was here, and I saw the work, I said, if I come here, she said, women are almost more sensitive than men. She said, let's buy a small present for them, a bit of chocolate. And I would like to invite the translators and to have Sitla give them the present they have brought.
It's all right, sir. No hay traducción en este evento porque por eso no hay traducción. There is no translation. No traducción.
Before the group photo, we also would like to give Sandew a gift. We would like to give Sandew a gift, a present. Well, good afternoon. On behalf of all of my colleagues, my name is Juan Antonio Sojo. I am a lawyer. I am part of a professional and technical movement which we combine different socials and unions, both professional and technical. And I am also part of the Lawyer Council of Venezuela, which along with the National Assembly, we work on lawmaking, and this is part of the chapter of lawyers. And on behalf of my colleagues, we will now give you the Bolivarian Constitution of Venezuela, which have the ideas of Simon Bolivar, and in the Article 2 you were talking about how we define ourselves, and that's part of our constitutions. And when we reform the constitution, we will include socialism in there. We are pluricultural and multi-ethnic, which is part of our constitution. You also mentioned religion, and regarding that, that's part of Title III of Human Rights Guarantees and Duties. Not all constitutions have a chapter regarding that, and it has 10 chapters. And one of the titles of those chapters is dedicated to human rights. And in our constitution, chapter 8, the environment is part of human rights. And so we will now thank our colleagues, Mienset, Jimena, Guillermo, translators, technicians, those that made this possible. And I would like to make a request to Guillermo and Jimena. The first seminar, I was in the second one, and you in the third one. Maybe we could have access to the information of the first seminar. So we will now give you, please come forward, Professor. So we will now give you the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. It has 350 articles, 10 chapters, and amendment, because the previous Constitution didn't allow indefinite re-election, and in order to have the re-election of Chavez and other branches along with the National Assembly, there was an amendment so that was possible. And in 2009 there were some issues regarding the syntax and the writing, and we also modified that. This is the updated version, and on behalf of everyone, we are giving you the Constitution of our country. We will also give you this book on behalf of all of us, which is regarding the legacy of Chavez. And I couldn't bring the one about Simon Bolivar, but I will send it afterwards. Yes, you have to learn Spanish. Well, I would like to remind you this continues. In October, we will have Rebecca Igreja from the University of Brasilia to continue this debate regarding reparations. This activity that is organized by the Institute of Social Transformation of IBIC and the Simon Bolivar Institute, with the support of the Ministry of Science and Technology, which is where we are today, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So once again, I would like to thank translators, the streaming team, technicians that are behind the scenes, and all of you that attended. We will finish with a group photo near to the lifters. Thank you very much.